seriously, not today, please.
Are you okay?
I'm fine.
You don't look fine at all.
And you don't look like that taxi will move again today.
Honestly, even me and the taxi are no longer communicating. Here, take this.
Thank you,
I'm Daniel.
Naya.
Good evening, sir. Welcome, sir. One day, somebody will really insult you on the road because of this thing you're doing. Good evening to you, too. You're a billionaire dressing like somebody looking for a mechanic apprentice work. Taxi driver. That one is even worse. I met somebody today. Another love experiment?
Tolu looked at Daniel and shook his head. He had seen this happen before. Rich men falling in love, then ruining everything because of fear. But Daniel refused to listen. Because for the first time in many years, someone had made him feel normal again. Not a billionaire, not a businessman, just Daniel. After that day by the roadside, Daniel could not stop thinking about her. There was something different about Naya. Something peaceful. Something honest. So little by little, he started finding reasons to see her again. Sometimes it was random phone calls, sometimes short walks after work, and sometimes late evening conversations beside noisy Lagos roads. Before long, their small moments slowly became a routine. One night, Daniel took her to a small suya spot not far from Ojuelegba. Nothing fancy. Plastic chairs, smoke rising into the night air, cars passing loudly beside them. But somehow, Naya looked happier there than most rich people looked inside five-star restaurants. She laughed loudly at his dry jokes, complained about pepper like a child, and spoke about life without trying to impress anybody. Little by little, Daniel started falling in love with peace, and for the first time in many years, someone was looking at him like a normal man. Not a billionaire, not a businessman, just Daniel. But while Daniel was learning how to love honestly, he was still hiding the biggest truth of his life. At home, life was still far from easy for Naya. Every morning came with another problem: hospital bills, house rent, food, her mother's medication. Sometimes, she stayed awake deep into the night trying to calculate how to make small money solve big problems. But somehow, whenever Daniel was around, life felt lighter. To Naya, Daniel was just a struggling man trying his best to survive Lagos. And honestly, that made her trust him even more. One evening, while they walked through a busy market together, Naya stopped suddenly beside a roasted corn stand. Daniel laughed immediately, because he already knew what she wanted. The small things about her were slowly becoming his favorite part of the day. And while Naya was slowly falling in love, Daniel's guilt kept growing heavier, because deep down, he knew the truth could destroy everything they were building. Daniel tried many times to tell her the truth, but each time he looked at Naya, fear stopped him. Not fear of losing money, but fear of losing the only person who had loved him without asking what he owned. Meanwhile, Tolu watched everything quietly from the sidelines, and the more he watched, the more worried he became. Because what started as a harmless test was slowly becoming a dangerous lie. One afternoon, Daniel sat distracted in his office, staring at his phone. Tolu noticed immediately. He already knew Daniel was thinking about Naya again. And honestly, that was exactly what scared him. Because people in love stop thinking clearly, and Daniel was already too deep to walk away safely. That same night, Naya sat quietly inside her room, counting the little money she had left. Some of it was for food, some was for her mother's medicine, and somehow, she still needed to make everything stretch till the end of the week. Then Daniel called. At first, his voice sounded normal, but after a few seconds, Naya noticed something was wrong. Daniel told her his taxi had developed serious engine problems, and suddenly, the little piece in his voice disappeared. Even though Daniel was pretending, Naya believed every word, because to her, he was simply a hard-working man going through another difficult moment. So despite her own struggles, she offered to help him. And for the first time since all this began, Daniel truly hated himself. Because while Naya was sacrificing out of love, he was testing her with lies. That was the moment the guilt truly started eating him alive. Not long after that, Daniel asked Naya to marry him. Nothing extravagant, no crowd, no expensive restaurant, just the two of them, standing quietly beneath the Lagos evening sky. For a few seconds, Naya could not even speak, because after everything life had put her through, she never imagined somebody would choose her so completely. And when Daniel finally slipped the ring onto her finger, Naya said yes almost immediately. To her, it felt like hope, like maybe life was finally becoming softer. But while Naya saw a future filled with love, Daniel saw the weight of the secret he still hadn't confessed. Because every passing day, telling the truth was becoming harder. A few days later, a small celebration was organized for close family and friends. Nothing luxurious, just simple decorations, plastic chairs, soft music, and people genuinely happy for them. Even Mama Naya smiled that day for the first time in a long while. As friends clapped and congratulated them, Naya looked happier than she had been in years. But standing quietly at the back of the hall, Tolu could not shake the feeling that something was wrong, because while everybody else was celebrating love, he was watching a dangerous lie grow bigger by the day, and deep down, he knew the truth would not stay hidden forever. Not long after the celebration, Daniel and Naya got married quietly. The wedding was simple, small church, a few family members, close friends, nothing extravagant, but to Naya, it felt perfect. For the first time in a very long time, she genuinely believed life was finally changing for the better. After the wedding, Daniel took her to the small apartment he had rented under his fake identity. It wasn't luxurious, but Naya still smiled as she arranged the little space like it was her dream home. She cooked happily, prayed for their future, and loved Daniel with complete sincerity. But every single day, Daniel's guilt kept growing heavier, because while Naya was building a marriage honestly, he was building it on a lie, and slowly, the secret started destroying him from inside. As the weeks passed, their small apartment slowly began to feel like home. Naya filled the tiny space with warmth, simple meals, late-night conversations, quiet prayers before sleeping, and somehow, the peace Daniel had spent years searching for was now living inside a small apartment in Lagos. But while Naya was learning to trust him more every day, Daniel was becoming more afraid, because the more genuine her love became, the more dangerous the truth felt. Then one morning, everything changed. Naya suddenly rushed into the bathroom feeling sick. At first, Daniel panicked, but when she finally looked at him and smiled through tears, he immediately understood. They were going to have a baby. For a moment, nothing else mattered. Not the lies, not the fear, not the secret. Daniel held her tightly, laughing and crying at the same time, but deep down, another fear quietly entered his heart. Because now, his lie was no longer affecting only Naya. It was becoming a family. But while Daniel and Naya were preparing for their future together, someone else was quietly watching from a distance. Victoria, elegant, powerful, and deeply bitter about losing Daniel. At first, she believed the relationship would not last, but the more she heard about Naya, the more angry she became. Because unlike many women around Daniel, Naya had loved him without money, without status, without knowing who he truly was. And somehow, that made Victoria hate her even more. One afternoon, Victoria finally decided she had seen enough. So without warning, she drove straight to Daniel and Naya's apartment, and with that single decision, everything Daniel had tried to hide finally began to collapse. When Naya opened the door that afternoon, she immediately knew the woman standing outside did not come with good intentions. Victoria carried herself with the confidence of somebody used to power, elegant clothes, cold expression, eyes filled with quiet judgment. At first, Naya thought maybe she was in the wrong apartment, but then Victoria walked inside slowly, looked around the small living room, and smiled in disbelief. That was when the tension began. Naya asked who she was, but instead of answering directly, Victoria dropped a business magazine onto the table. The moment Naya looked down, her entire body went cold. There on the front cover was Daniel. Not as a struggling taxi driver, but as one of the richest businessmen in Lagos. For a few seconds, Naya could not breathe properly. Everything around her suddenly stopped making sense, and as Victoria calmly revealed the truth, the life Naya thought she was building with Daniel began falling apart piece by piece. That night, Daniel returned home expecting another normal evening with his wife, but immediately he entered the apartment. He felt something was wrong. The lights were off, the room was silent, and Naya was sitting alone in darkness. Then he saw the magazine lying on the table. In that moment, Daniel understood everything. The secret was finally out. At first, he tried to explain, tried to calm her down, tried to make her understand why he lied, but every word only made the pain worse. Because while Daniel saw fear and insecurity behind his actions, Naya saw betrayal. She remembered every moment she struggled beside him, every time she sacrificed for him, every prayer she prayed for a man who was never truly poor. And slowly, the heartbreak turned into anger. For the first time since they met, Naya looked at Daniel like a complete stranger. And somewhere deep inside, Daniel realized he might have just destroyed the best thing that had ever happened to him. Outside, heavy Lagos rain poured endlessly into the night. But inside the apartment, the pain was even heavier. Daniel begged Naya not to leave. Again and again, he tried to explain that fear had pushed him into the lie. But to Naya, none of it mattered anymore. Because the man she trusted completely had built their entire relationship on deception. With tears running down her face, Naya packed a small bag quietly. Daniel followed her outside desperately through the rain, still apologizing, still begging, still hoping she would change her mind. But the damage had already gone too deep. For Naya, the heartbreak was no longer about money. It was about trust. And as the taxi finally drove away into the rainy Lagos night, Daniel stood there completely broken. For the first time in many years, money could not save him from losing the person he truly loved. After Naya left, Daniel's life slowly became empty. The massive mansion, the luxury cars, the expensive office, none of it brought him peace anymore. Everywhere he looked, he saw reminders of her. The small habits she used to laugh about, the quiet prayers before bed, the way she smiled whenever she ate roasted corn. For the first time in his life, Daniel understood what loneliness truly felt like. Meanwhile, Naya returned to her mother's house carrying both heartbreak and pregnancy alone. Some nights, she cried quietly after everyone had fallen asleep. Not because she stopped loving Daniel, but because loving him now felt painful. And despite everything he had done, part of her still missed him. But far away from her, Daniel was finally beginning to understand something important. Real love was never the problem. Fear was. And by the time he realized it, he had already lost almost everything that mattered. As the pregnancy became more difficult, Mama Naya tried her best to stay strong for her daughter. But deep down, she was worried. Naya barely spoke about Daniel anymore, yet somehow, his absence remained everywhere in the house. Then one afternoon, while sitting quietly inside a small clinic for antenatal appointment, Naya suddenly saw Daniel on a television screen. He was giving a business interview, well-dressed, confident, looking exactly like the billionaire she never truly knew. At first, Naya tried to ignore it, but then the interviewer mentioned rumors about problems in his marriage. For a moment, Daniel became quiet, and when he finally spoke, his voice no longer sounded like a businessman. It sounded like a broken man. He admitted that he had deeply hurt somebody he truly loved, and if she was watching, he wanted her to know that not one day had passed without regret. Nisia looked away immediately, trying to stop the tears gathering in her eyes. Because despite everything, a part of her heart still listened whenever Daniel spoke. As the weeks passed, Naya's due date drew closer, but emotionally, she still felt exhausted. The betrayal, the pregnancy, the uncertainty about the future, everything weighed heavily on her heart. Then one stormy night, the labor pains suddenly began. At first, Naya tried to endure it quietly, but within minutes, the pain became unbearable. Mama Naya immediately panicked, and despite Naya's resistance, she finally called Daniel. The moment Daniel heard what was happening, nothing else mattered anymore. Not business meetings, not pride, not the past. He drove through the heavy Lagos rain like a man terrified of losing everything. And when he finally arrived at the hospital, for the first time in a very long while, Daniel looked completely helpless, because no amount of wealth could protect him from the fear sitting inside his chest that night. Hours later, the sound of a crying baby finally filled the hospital corridor, and in that moment, Daniel completely broke down. Not from sadness, but from relief. For the first time in months, he finally allowed himself to breathe properly again. When the nurse gently placed the baby in his arms, Daniel could not stop staring at her. Tiny fingers, tiny face, and somehow, she already felt like the most important thing in his life. Then reality hit him again. Because while he held his daughter with overwhelming joy, the woman he truly loved was still emotionally far away from him. Later that morning, Daniel quietly entered Naya's hospital room, carrying the baby carefully. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. The silence between them carried too much pain, too much history, too many things left unsaid. But when Daniel finally placed the baby gently into Naya's arms, something inside the room softened. Not complete forgiveness, not yet, but for the first time since everything fell apart, the anger between them no longer felt stronger than the love. After the birth of their daughter, everything between Daniel and Naya changed slowly. Not suddenly, not magically. Some wounds were still too deep to disappear overnight. But little by little, Daniel started showing up differently, not with expensive gifts, not with money, but with patience, consistency, and genuine effort. He visited often, helped with the baby, stayed awake during difficult nights, and slowly, Naya began seeing a version of Daniel she had never truly noticed before. Not the billionaire, not the liar, just a man genuinely trying to become better. Then one evening, while watching their daughter sleep peacefully, Naya finally asked him a question that had lived inside her heart for months. If you could go back, would you still lie to me? For a long moment, Daniel could not answer. Then quietly, he shook his head. Because losing Naya had taught him something money never could. Real love does not survive control. It survives honesty. And somewhere between the heartbreak, the forgiveness, and the child sleeping peacefully between them, both of them slowly began finding their way back to each other. Years later, on a calm evening just before sunset, Daniel returned to the same roadside where he first met Naya. But this time, everything felt different. The fear that once controlled him was gone. The pride that once ruined him had faded. And standing beside him now was the little girl who had changed both their lives forever. As warm Lagos sunlight covered the city in gold, Naya slowly walked toward them, older, wiser, still beautiful. For a moment, Daniel simply stood there watching her quietly, because after everything they survived, seeing her still felt unreal sometimes. Their daughter ran happily toward Naya, laughing, and as Daniel watched the two people he loved most in the world together, he finally understood what true wealth really meant. Not money, not power, not status, but peace, honesty, and the kind of love that survives even after being broken. Because sometimes, the people we fear losing the most are the same people who teach us how to become better human beings. And for Daniel, that lesson changed his life forever. Sometimes, life does not destroy us because of hatred. Sometimes, it happens because of fear. Daniel was so afraid of losing love that he almost destroyed the very thing he prayed for. But love has a strange way of giving people second chances, especially when they are willing to change. And although the scars never disappeared completely, Daniel and Naya slowly learned something many people never understand. Real love is not built on perfection. It is built on truth. Because at the end of the day, money can buy comfort, but only honesty can buy peace. And somewhere in the middle of noisy Lagos traffic, late-night suya, tears, forgiveness, and second chances, two broken people finally found their way home. And that was how the man who once tested love with lies finally learned that real love only survives through truth. Daniel almost lost everything because of fear. But in the end, love gave him one more chance to become a better man. And as for Naya, her kindness, patience, and strength eventually brought her the peace she truly deserved. Because sometimes in life, the people who hurt us the most can still become part of our healing if they are willing to truly change. But one thing remains certain: love built on lies will always break eventually, and only honesty can build a home strong enough to survive life's storms. Thank you for watching Folktales by Chinwe. Please don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe for more emotional African stories.